There we go. So welcome everyone. Thank you again for being here. I'll introduce myself. My name is Madeline Mejia, and I am the VP of Programs for the Harvard Club of Southern California. And joining me tonight, we have Ed Ogosta, who also used to sit on the board a few years back, and he has been so kind to donate his time and share his extensive expertise to help us find some knowledge and understand this process a little bit more so we know how to proceed as we continue forward. I'm going to set up the setup for tonight. So after my introduction, I will ask Ed to share his screen and he will present his presentation. There is a lot of information that we want to share with you. This meeting is being recorded. But we also, part of the Harvard Club of Southern California, we have created a wildfires assistance committee, and we do have a hub of resources plus a whole series of different info and webinar events that we put together. At the end of our meeting, I'll share with you where those are, and then tomorrow you'll receive an email with the link to the website as well as to the presentation that Ed has put together. So if you have any questions, I will ask that you type them in the chat. And after Ed's presentation, I'll moderate and we'll go through the questions that you've posted. Okay. So Ed, thank you again for being here. Thank you, my friend. I'm going to turn this over to you, and it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Madeline. Thanks for everyone at the Harvard Club of Southern California. It's a real honor to be speaking to this community today. I graduated in 2001 from the Harvard Graduate School of Design with a degree in architecture. This has been really the worst time in my career. I've been doing residential architect in Los Angeles for 25 years, and I'm a native of Southern California, grew up here, and it has been a terrible year and very, very difficult. We love buildings, and to see buildings destroyed is always so tragic and difficult. So I thought, if there's a way I can help with this, it's to share knowledge. And I thought I could help demystify this process and really give some straight talk about how people can proceed if they're considering rebuilding their house. My goal here is to tell you the things that I would want to know if this had happened to me. And I think for a lot of people, I'd say the vast majority of people, buying a house is like buying a car. It's you go on the lot and it's already there. And if you can shop around, find one you like, and you just buy it when you like it. Now, all of a sudden, there are thousands of people who can't buy that car and need to make that car. So they need to get with a auto designer and envision what that car would be, and then talk with the people on the assembly line and figure out how that car would be built. So it's just a completely different process, I think, for almost everybody. And I would bet that most people on this call have never talked to an architect before, never used an architect before, because it's just a very select segment of people who go through this process. So again, my goal here is to share knowledge and help you along and tell you the things I would want to know. There is a lot of content that we're covering today. I will go as fast as I can through it, but I tried to trim it down to the basic things that I would want to know. Again, this is being recorded. It's going to be shared on YouTube. The whole presentation PDF will be shared with you. So I would recommend don't worry so much about taking notes and writing down links and things, because it's all going to be given to you in the document. I think what's most important is to just listen and kind of try to understand the story and the process. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and we'll get started here. All right, is that working, Madeline?
Yes, it is.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So January 7th, 2025, I was at my project site on Chautauqua Boulevard in Pacific Palisades. I was at our regular job meeting. We had a contractor and my owner for a house we were building. And we were just doing our regular meetings, going around. We had reached about 2/3 construction completion on this house. And we're talking about security systems and mechanical systems. And someone said, there's a fire. And we just didn't listen. We just said, whatever, and kept talking for about another 20 minutes. And then a worker came up and said, guys, there's a fire and you need to look at this. So we all climbed up on the roof and, oops, and this was the scene. So this was looking north. Chautauqua Boulevard is the street across here. This was the garage and ADU portion of the project. And there's this huge clouds of smoke that were billowing across the site. And we kind of stood there and watched it for about 45 minutes or so. Planes circling overhead, helicopters, fire engines, phone was going crazy with alerts. And eventually, after about 45 minutes, my client was still trying to talk about some of the waterproofing systems and the window flashing and all this stuff. And I said, we need to stop this meeting and we need to come back later. And so we made a plan to come back on Thursday. And I got out of there, went down the hill, and got home. This was the view of about where it had reached completion. You could see the plywood was unprotected, but we had all our mechanical systems in. Pool was poured. You can see that this is the roof we were standing on, and that's kind of how far we were able to get with it. This is a rendering of where that roof that we were standing on. So this is where we were trying to get with the project, what it was going to look like. On the interior, we had this big window facing south, brought in a whole bunch of light. So this is where we had gotten with that same viewpoint inside the house. So we were far along and it had gone very smoothly. So I went home, watched the news, glued to the news. Around about 1 a.m, I heard on the news that our project had burned. And the way I heard is our neighbor's house had burned. And so saw a video of this burning. I broke down. We put a lot of work and effort into these projects, and to see it destroyed is something I never thought I'd see in my career. So that room later looked like this. And the loss of the project was very crushing for me. We're not the kinds of architects that just churn out dozens and dozens of houses. Each one is unique. Each one is carefully crafted and invested with creativity and intellectual effort. So we had gotten almost 3 years that we had been working on this. Thankfully, our client family made it out okay. My heart broke for them, the loss of their dream. They were staying in a rental across the street, and that burned down, and they lost everything.
They held practice.
Can't either.
So,
Mark Twain, they shut down with a drop of rain.
so, so this, of course, wasn't my house, but I know something about the pain of this disaster. And we're looking to rebuild this. The owner is intent on rebuilding. We've already reordered windows and doors. We're thinking we might actually be the first house rebuilt in the Alphabet Streets because we already have permits. So we're in sort of a fortunate position, but that it remains to be seen how it all shakes out. But after this happened, I mourned the loss of the building, and I picked up this book in the library by this architect named Charles Moore. The book is called The Place of Houses. And he's an architect we don't talk much about anymore. He's sort of from the 70s, another generation, but I ran across this statement in that book, and I want to read it. It says, a good house is a created thing made of many parts, economically and meaningfully assembled. It speaks not just of the materials from which it is made, but of the intangible rhythms, spirits, and dreams of people's lives. Its site is only a tiny piece of the real world, yet this place is made to seem like an entire world. In its parts, it accommodates important human activities, yet in some, it expresses an attitude towards life. And I share this because I think it really does put a good frame on the discussion today. I think this disaster has shown us that houses are firstly and most fundamentally a place to live our lives, to create memories, to dream. And I think we've lost sight of that a bit in our culture. I think many people view houses as a place to store their stuff or a vehicle to generate wealth, a speculative income. Those are secondary concerns, I would say, for a dwelling. The primary concern is that it's a place where you're going to spend the moments of your lives, and I just want to frame that as a jumping off point for the discussion when we talk about creating houses. So let's talk about the discussion topics for the day. First, we're going to talk about project delivery models. Second, design team and planning. Third, what is the design process? Then fire builds, rebuilds, and the permitting and all the nuances the city has given us about fire rebuilds. We'll talk about construction and the construction process. And finally, we'll end with talk about fire hardening and resilience. These are the things that we are not going to be talking about today because it's beyond the scope of today's discussion. There's so much to talk about. I had to be aggressive and cut out things that we could talk about another time. First is insurance. There's already been 2 Harvard presentations that are on YouTube that delved into insurance. If you haven't seen those, I recommend you watch those. They're excellent. They go way beyond anything I know about insurance. So we're going to avoid that topic today. Debris removal is another one that there's a whole lot about that online as well. I'm sure most of you are in the process of doing that and figuring that out. Maybe in the Q&A, we can talk about it a little bit. Third, local infrastructure upgrades. So that's like, are they going to underground our power lines? That's a huge topic that there's just not clarity on that right now. Next is code reform. How do we fix the code so this doesn't happen again? It's a big topic we can't get to. The housing crisis and the ethics of single family versus multifamily homes. You know, how do we deal with the housing crisis when there's so many more people without housing? It's a huge topic. Sustainability, the climate crisis, and the ethics of rebuilding in the fire zones. Should we even rebuild in these zones? I can't get into that today. We're just looking at practical things to get you on your feet today. Lastly, politics, tariffs, not going to touch those in this discussion. So if you came here wanting to hear about these kinds of topics, I'm sorry to disappoint. You could send me an email and I'd love to grab a coffee and discuss it with you. But really, this discussion is for owners of destroyed single-family homes who are interested in rebuilding, want to know what that process is like. So let's jump in and talk about project delivery models. There's a couple, I'd say one of the first sort of forks in the road about how you proceed with creating a new house is deciding between some of these project delivery models. And there's there's sort of like three big ones that that you can go with. The first one is called design build, and that's when one company, like a developer or a builder, delivers both the design and construction processes. And we're going to go through the pros and cons of each of these different systems. The pros of this one are, oops, sorry. There's an in-house team that is your single point of contact in theory. It's a turnkey solution with fewer decisions involved for the homeowner. You potentially have an accelerated timeline by shortcutting the design and possibly permitting phases. The cons of this way of design build: the burden of oversight for quality control and construction execution is largely left up to you, the homeowner. There's really no policeman who's sort of watching how the contractor is doing the work. And if you think the building inspector is going to be that policeman, they have so many projects they're dealing with and reviewing. They do not have time to look in detail about everything that's going on the site. Usually they spend between 10 and 30 minutes on the job site when they're doing inspections. There's an inherent conflict of interest with this model. There is no independent advocate monitoring construction, so the incentive is to cut corners and compromise design to save costs. So again, there's no watchdog over a contractor in this scenario. So, so you have to be on top of it. There's no competitive bidding on the construction price with this model. So the price is the price, and you don't get other contractors giving you their prices in this model. The owners typically have limited design customization beyond surface finishes. And lastly, often the proposed designs are poorly attuned to their sites. So they're sort of pre-designed and they just sort of drop it on the site. Regardless of solar orientation and views, there's really little customization for that kind of thing typically. So often these designs are kind of formulaic and bloated. I think we've kind of seen the McMansion sort of type of building. I would say the quality is mediocre, and sometimes these kinds of projects are impolite to the neighborhood. On the other hand, to be fair, it is a house and it's a roof over your head, and it can be a faster way to get a roof over your head. So I don't discount it if people want to go this way. Next scenario, prefab. This is one we hear a lot about, and I think people are very interested in. Prefab is when a modular or prefab company manufactures the home in a factory and erects it on site. So here we see a couple of examples of that. They come in a lot of different styles, different configurations. There's pros and cons to this. The pros are the same pros that are with design build in the prior slide. You potentially have even faster timelines and improved construction quality due to controlled factory conditions. This works well with flat and open and easy sites that have easy zoning. And there is less construction waste too, because it's all assembled in a factory. There are also prefab ADUs, which exist. ADUs, if you don't know, are accessory dwelling units. Those are the small sort of houses, rental houses, granny flats, sometimes they're called, that you can build that have been, very, very popular in the last decade or so. So they make prefab ADUs that you can buy and drop into your site. The cons with prefab are the same cons that are with standard design build. Currently, there are only a handful of companies operating in LA, and some of them have recently gone out of business. There are potential bottlenecks with assembly line inefficiencies. So we're in a charged situation now where maybe lots and lots of people want to get a prefab house. So the assembly line backs up, and that can lead to delays and bottlenecks because you get in line and you wait until the assembly line gets to your order and builds your house. Sometimes there's a large upfront sum that's charged to secure your place in line, and that can be risky. The modules are boxy and are bound by the dimensions of a tractor trailer. So design flexibility is somewhat compromised. Usually you end up with these sort of skinny, long modules that have a height limitation of 8 or 9 feet on them. So that can compromise what you can do. And lastly, second to lastly, they are very difficult to adapt to some unique or tight sites, hillsides or sites with complex zoning. So if you have a weird triangular shaped lot with an easement that cuts through the middle of it and you're on a slope of 45 degrees, prefab is going to be hard. And lastly it's hard to prove. This one could be controversial and there might be pushback from people on this, but my understanding is that it's hard to prove the cost savings of prefab versus a regular stick-built house. What it saves you is time, saves you a couple of months, but from what I understand, it does not save you much money. Prefab's in the news a lot. These are some 2 articles that I recently saw. The first on the left is Rick Caruso has said that he will be providing prefab buildings at low cost or free, I believe, I'm not sure, to fire victims in need. The intent is these are manufactured, I believe, in Mexico and will be shipped and available here in Southern California. I don't know more than that, but you can pursue that if you're interested. On the right is a story about a couple in San Francisco late last year who had ordered a prefab home from a builder called Connect Homes, which until recently operated in Los Angeles. They went out of business late last year. They had already taken people's money and reneged on delivering the homes because their business went belly up. So this is a risk that there is. Again, I've heard of a number of companies that don't make it. They don't last very long. And because it's a very difficult business to try to figure out the assembly line of building houses and figuring out the demand. So this is a couple that had bad luck and the company went belly up and now they're without a house. The sort of last big one is called design, bid, build. This is, I think, very common in LA. This is the way we do most of our I'd say all of our projects. It's the system that's kind of the regular system that's been around for years and decades. And this is where one team manages design, like the team of architect and engineers, and one team manages construction, the general contractor and the subs. So the pros of this system are there's a division of responsibilities, and that means that you have an advocate for design integrity and quality control during construction. We, as the architect, are the policemen on the site, and we are making sure that what we designed and what we drew and what you paid for is what's getting built. There is maximum design flexibility with this method too. Architects are skilled in creating a home uniquely tailored to owner needs and the site. Design professionals are also adept at resolving complex sites and permitting issues, as are common in LA. LA is, I'm sure you've heard of regulatory, let's not say nightmare, but it is a very, very challenging regulatory atmosphere. And we are specialists kind of at that red tape and navigating the city. So that's another thing we bring. The bid process. The bid process brings a range of cost and skill options, so you can get multiple bids from multiple contractors to get multiple prices. You get a unique, one-of-a-kind home that suits your desired way of living as well with this model. The cons, potentially longer timelines due to the sequential steps required. We have to do things in order. We design first and then we build it later. So things aren't happening as simultaneously as in some other models. This is also more vulnerable to cost escalations if there is owner indecision or in construction design changes. So we have seen this on projects with our clients where all of a sudden you're on site and it's like, great, you're finally seeing the thing come to life in 3D. And boy, wouldn't it be great if I had another window here, or there was another skylight in here, or I don't know what to do. Should we, you know, change that room into an exercise room from a bedroom? So if you're kind of an indecisive person, you can be in trouble here during construction, because design changes are very, very cheap in the early stages of design because it's just paper. But once we get into construction, it is multiple orders more expensive to change things in construction. Another con, the owner is responsible for separately interfacing with both the design and construction teams. So because it's not all under one roof, you're interfacing with your design team, you're also interfacing with your construction teams. So that's a bit more management on your part. Lastly, there are possible miscommunications or conflicts between teams if they are poorly matched. So if you have a super highly skilled architect with great detailed drawings and you have a low performing contractor who's the first time he's doing it, there's going to be some difficulty there because there's a mismatch in skill sets. And so you have to be cognizant of picking the right team that can all work together. I would say, in my experience, it's not common that we have major miscommunications and problems with contractors. Pretty much everyone I've worked with, I would work with again. And I think they would say the same about me, but I'm sure we've all heard, there are nightmare stories that I'm sure everybody's heard about construction. So, so there is a potential for that if you're not careful with this model. There's a couple more alternate documentation models that I want to put out there just so that people are aware of them. Standardized plans. LA City and LA County may provide a website of pre-approved house plans, which can be purchased inexpensively to expedite permitting. This already exists for ADU plans. So there is a website, there's a resources page at the end of this presentation, which I'll be sharing, that has all the links in it. But you can already go onto the LADBS, which is the Department of Building and Safety's website, and there's a whole bunch of pre-approved ADUs. You can purchase those for, I think, a relatively inexpensive price, and it will expedite the production of an ADU. So I think that's a really great thing. If you just need to get back on site, that's one way you can do it. However, these plans may require alterations that are stamped by a design pro for specific site conditions. Again, if you got some kind of slope on your site or something, or an easement, and plan changes that you do to these may trigger regular plan checks. So if you find some pre-approved plan and you say, I just wish that bathroom was over here instead over there, that might trigger a regular plan check. Another documentation model is called pattern book plans. These are very similar to pre-approved plans. However, they're not necessarily pre-approved yet by the building officials. You might find a bit more available plan options with this model. There is an organization called foothillcatalog.org. They are focused on Altadena. It's a group of architects and builders who are looking to create standard plans to try to preserve the character of those neighborhoods and make it easy for people to rebuild. So I recommend monitoring that group as well. It could prove to be a good starting point for a lot of people. Then there's these kind of what I call copy and paste plans. This is a cost-saving tactic of developers where you use similar or identical model designs on multiple sites. And this reduces the uncertainty of permitting and construction, though I would say it tends to result in a generic repetitive streetscape that's devoid of architectural variety and character. So I'm not a huge fan of this, but you might run across a builder who says, hey, we're building a house 3 streets over. Do you want to just use that design on your site? And many people might just say, yeah, let's do that. and they don't care that it's not quite uniquely tailored to their needs. Lastly, our drafting services. These are unlicensed individuals who are, I would say, quote, house designers, who are not registered in California or legally allowed to carry the title of architect. They're generally, I would say, mediocre designers. I think they're unsophisticated about the process, and they are a bargain, at least initially. There's the old saying, if you think it's expensive to hire a professional, just wait till you hire an amateur. And I would say a lot of these drafting services are, they kind of just sort of make a set of plans for you and then they're gone and don't really help you through the whole process. Architects are licensed. They, there's something like 10 examinations that we take in the state of California to get our license. It's a very, very rigorous process. Typically takes about 10 years from the day you graduate from school to the day that you get your license, if you pursue it, if you're rigorous about it. So we are professionals and we understand process, I would argue, way better than just simple drafting services. Okay, let's talk about the design team and the planning process. So this is a diagram of the design bid build process. So that's the process we just talked about, where you have an architect, contractor, and owner. The architect and contractor have separate teams. In this scenario, we call it the three-legged stool. And what that means is there's an owner and they have their team, there's an architect and they have their team, and there's a contractor and they have their team. And the idea is that they balance each other out so that there's checks and balances between each group. And so this, I know this looks like a complicated diagram, but basically the big thing is that there's this triangle between owner, architect, and contractor. The owner has their team, which is usually pretty small. At the beginning of a project, you usually need a site surveyor and a geologist or soils tester at the very beginning, just to kind of give an assessment of what your site is. We can assist with providing you recommendations for those people. You probably have a financial team that you're dealing with your insurance. You're dealing with, how to figure out how to pay for this. Very large projects sometimes have a project manager as well, but that's not the norm. So that's your owner team. Over here on the architect side, we're kind of the quarterback for the design team. So we're coordinating between structural engineers, geotechnical engineers, civil engineers. You can keep going with engineers, MEP, landscape architects. I put these in dashed because they're not all required, but some projects may need them, depending on the complexity and size and scale of the project. Usually at bare minimum, we're going to need a structural engineer, a geotechnical engineer, and a civil engineer. And we are coordinating all their work and assembling it into a designed set of drawings. So we're the ones that are in charge of pulling that all together and submitting them down here to the city and county plan checkers. So we are interfacing with the city. We're providing the project into plan check and getting it approved for permits. Now over here on the contractor side, they're in charge of their team. So they're in charge of the framing carpenters and the HVAC subs, electrical subs, mill workers, all those different people who are contributing bits to the physical project itself. The contractor is in charge of dealing with that team and getting it executed. So you'll see this dash line between us, between the architect and contractor, there is communication. So we are talking to each other. We are sharing information. I'm going on the building sites, reviewing the projects, and making sure that what we design is what's getting built. But we do not have a direct contract with each other. The owner has a contract with the architect and a contract with the contractor. And then lastly, the contractor is also in charge of the city inspectors. So I shouldn't say in charge of, he's interfacing with the city inspectors. So they're the ones who are coming on site during construction and checking out the process of construction and ensuring that it is in compliance with, building codes. And you'll see that there's this sort of faded dash line between the city plan checkers and the city inspectors. They, in theory, should be communicating. In my experience, that communication is patchy at best. So sometimes we'll get something approved in plan check and it looks like it's all compliant. And then an inspector will come on site during construction and say, hold on, wait a second, what are you doing here? And then there needs to be a communication between the plan checker and the inspectors. Sometimes that is a little wrench that gets thrown in things. But again, the contractor is the one who's in charge of interfacing with the inspectors. So hopefully that's clear about the whole system of organization for the people involved. So what does an architect do? We are a steady advisor to help you over the critical building hurdles. So we do design and documentation. An architect collaborates closely with you to translate your goals into a cohesive design, resulting in a set of detailed construction documents that we create. We do collaboration. We are the design team captains coordinating with engineers, consultants, and the building department. We're in charge of permitting and managing plan check. And we do construction administration during construction. While the general contractor is the leader of the construction process, the architect monitors project quality for fitness with the construction documents and reviews budget and schedule. And then there's this question: are they required? Do you have to have an architect? The answer is no. While California does not require an architect stamp for single-family homes under 2 stories, trying to build without one in LA, given the complexity of our codes and our permitting and our site conditions and the building industry, can be perilous. So if you want to go this way, you should understand the consequences that a lot more pressure will be put on you to be figuring this out, navigating the process. And unless you already have built houses and you understand all this, and you know people who can draw up a house and you're confident that it will meet your needs, it could be a difficult challenge for you to go forward without a design professional on your side. So how do you find the right architect? First, qualifications. You want to start with architects who have a proven track record of constructed single-family residence, ideally in or nearby your jurisdiction. It's best if the architect is located within a 1-hour radius of your site, because during construction, we're going on site multiple times, often once a week, we're going on site. And you want an architect that has at least 15 years experience designing homes, because it takes a long time to build up a wealth of experience to understand the nuances of making houses. Look at their portfolio, review their website closely, and see if their work interests you. Most architects specialize in a certain body of work. I would say there are few that are good at all styles. Usually they're sort of specialized in the kind of work that they produce. Rapport. Building a house is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It is a long haul. It can go 2.5, 3, 4 years sometimes. So it's vital that you both have shared values, that you communicate smoothly together, and that you're compatible. It's a bit like a marriage, and you want to be able to swing with the punches together when things aren't great, and be able to keep each other energized and on the same side. Check their license. There's a link here to go to the California website where you can just enter in a name and check a license. There are some nefarious individuals out there who will call themselves architects. That is actually against the law. You are not allowed to use the term architect if you do not have a license in California. So beware of people saying they're an architect. That's why some people call themselves a house designer or an architectural designer. Those are nuanced ways of telling you that they don't have their license. References. Ask if you can contact prior clients and request the addresses of some locally completed projects and check them out on Google Street View, and I'll show you why in the next slide. Lastly, then some sources. There's lots of places to kind of search around and find good architects. Dwell Magazine, the LA Times, it's a design section, house.com, AIA Los Angeles. AIA is the American Institute of Architects, which is the trade organization, the national trade organization for architects. So there's a division here in Los Angeles, and they have a website and some good people there who might be able to help you out, point you in the right direction. Arcdaily.com is just a design website where you could go on there and type in a search for Los Angeles house or Los Angeles dwelling, and you'll probably come up with a bunch of recently built houses. There is a directory of LA pros, which I think is very good, called Design for LA. Again, there's a link at the end of the presentation, but this is a list of professionals in Los Angeles that have signed up to help with this rebuilding effort. So it's architects, contractors, engineers, other expediters, other groups of people who want to help. And it's, I think, a very good starting point for you to start searching for your architect. Contract. You need a contract with your architect. It's required by law. We use AIA contracts. Again, it's the American Institute of Architects. It's the industry standard. I think everybody in this field are familiar with them. So I would request that when you are looking at your contract with your architect. Okay, so the internet is not reality. These two images are of a house. One of these is a photograph from a camera. The other is a computer rendering. So look closely and see if you can tell which one is which. Because I can't. The answer is the one on the left is the actual photo. The one on the right is the rendering. And I bring this up because this is why I say completed projects that you want to ask about, and why I would say get the addresses of these completed projects and look on Google Street View and see if they're actually built. Because I have run across a number of websites of people who are, I'll say this, people who are very recently out of school, who are very good at rendering and very good at AI, and can whip together a website that's full of 15, 20 houses that look completed, that look built. And it's very, very difficult to tell. So I just give this as a tip for people. Do not be deceived by everything you see online and through your computer screen, because there are people who are trying to get projects out of this who don't have the experience. I will say though, renderings are something we use. I mean, we need that in our design process. It's part of something that we use. It visualizes the house and what it's going to be. So I'm not saying that it's a wrong to use renderings. We use them, but I just would say be careful and suspicious, and you want to see houses that have been really built. All right, project costs. There's this notion of soft and hard costs that you're going to hear about when you begin talking to architects and contractors. The way to break it down is this. Your total project budget is this pie. There are hard costs, which are, those are the costs that are the direct costs of materials and labor to construct the physical building itself. So that's this blue area. Those are things like doors, walls, windows, site work, equipment rental, contractor fees, appliances. Typically, this is about 75 to 85% of your total project budget. Then you've got soft costs. These are indirect costs that are necessary just to make the project happen. So these are things like permit fees, site survey, soils report, your architect, your engineers, et cetera. It's not physically ending up in the building, but is a cost that's necessary to make the building happen. Typically, this is 15 to 25% of your total project budget, depending on your site, your project complexity regulations. So simple sites are going to be smaller percentage. Difficult, complex sites with complex projects are going to be more in soft costs. Okay, next is a slide that's going to probably give heartburn to a number of people, but it's a lot of questions out there, and it's, again, what I would want to know, and that is about costs and budgeting. This chart on the side here is something we put together that shows what we see in terms of project costs. And this is in dollars per square foot of the hard costs. So again, this blue area is what we're talking about with this chart. Here's what we are seeing. This is sort of a bell curve is what we see in terms of what projects cost. And so these are in dollars per square foot, which is a rough order of magnitude that you hear about a lot in this industry. So you want 2,000 square foot house, and you get close to say it's $1,000 a square foot, then that's a $2 million house. So that's kind of the way of thinking about it. What we see now is in this curve, there's sort of a range, sort of in the bigger area here of about 700, 750 to all the way up to 1,000, 1,050. I'm sure there are people that are pounding their heads on the desk and yelling at me right now. I don't make these numbers. This is just what I see. And this is based on anecdotal discussions with peers in the LA residential design and construction industry. This is not from published data. So it's a big disclaimer there. But it's just a way of thinking about how you're going to start and budget your project. So I say this because a lot of times we'll tell clients that, there's a range of, let's say, $600 to $1,000, and all they hear is $600. So you're really going to be in the middle. Everyone wants a deal, and everyone thinks that they deserve the cheapest price, but the reality is, someone's got to be in the middle. Someone's going to get the cheap project. There'll be a few that get a cheap project. There'll be a few that get a very expensive project. And the reason this curve continues on is because if you have a very luxe project and you are putting marble everywhere, well, then of course your dollars per square foot can go on and on and on. But I'm talking about kind of regular old reasonable houses, drywall, stucco finishes, kind of straightforward houses. You're under this curve is where I would put it. Now, what I would say is the best practice is to have a budget range in mind rather than a fixed cost. The bidding process will give you an opportunity to see a spectrum of costs. So rather than coming into this process saying, I want it to be $1 million, you say, I'm okay with it to be 900 to $1.2 million, $1.3 million. Then we have some range, and the bidding process will tell you that. You'll say, oh, maybe one does come in at $900,000, and maybe two of them come in at $1.3 million. So being flexible is, I think, a good piece of advice rather than being dead set on a number. I would also recommend you have a range for desired square footage and rigorously evaluate scenarios to cut square footage and bring down costs. This I cannot emphasize enough. Try to be flexible on what square footage you can have. We've had clients come in that say, it's got to be 3,000 square feet. And the question is why? Why is that such a sacred number? I think people will most likely get locked into what they had. And my old house was 2,000, so I want this to be 2,000. I understand that, I get that, but I recommend you have some flexibility and try to think critically about how that could change. There are creative ways, and this is what architects do. We figure out creative ways to adjust that. So Do you really need both the separate office and the gym room? Could they be combined? Do you really need separate room for your kid to come home from college? Or could there be a Murphy bed somewhere that they can sleep in, for the temporary time that they're there? So how do you make spaces do double duty? Do you really need that garage to park 2 cars, or could that become the gym later on? So figuring out ways, and it's tough, I know. People get locked in and want to have the square footage they had, but if you can really figure out ways to squeeze it down, that's going to serve you well when it comes to pricing out the project. And when we start to get bids, especially when there is this surge of people who are all going to be wanting to build at the same time. Projects that are involving significantly sloped lots and basements or premium materials, those are generally going to incur higher costs. I think that's self-explanatory. If we broke out this table between the Palisades and Altadena, I think it would be different. Those curves might be different. They might offset from each other differently because those are different sort of construction climates between Altadena and the Palisades. But we will see in 6 months what this table looks like. And these are what we were seeing before the fire. This is January of this year is sort of where we saw it. What it's going to look like 6 months to a year, I don't have a crystal ball. I haven't the faintest idea. You can check with the contractor on these prices. I can't, guarantee this is what you're going to get, but this is our sharing of knowledge. A note on foundations. A lot of people have been coming to us saying, we want to save our foundation. Can we save our foundation? The answer is probably not. Unless your house was built, let's say in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, it's going to be an uphill battle. The code changes dynamically very often. So if your house was built 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, it's a completely different kind of foundation system that was often used, especially if you were on a hillside. There were houses built in the 60s in the hillside districts that only dug down maybe 5 feet or so and plunked the house down on top of that. Nowadays, it's very common in the hillside areas that it's almost guaranteed in the hillside areas that if you're on a slope, a substantial slope, you're going to need caissons, and they drill down. They go down 30, 40, 50 feet until they hit bedrock, and they need to be spaced every 6 feet, 8 feet. You got to drill, drill, drill to basically support the house on bedrock. And that is a total transformation from the way they used to do it in the 60s and 70s. So that is why I would say I wouldn't get your hopes up that a foundation could be saved if you're on that kind of condition. If you're on a house that's on a flat, basic site that is really simple, maybe. If it's not that damaged, maybe. But sometimes you find it's not worth it. It's just not worth it because you got to demo it and haul it away, and at that point it might be more trouble than it's worth. This is our foundation on Chautauqua in the Palisades. We are going to be able to save our foundation, and that is because we're in a very special case. The foundation was poured about 8 months ago. We have permits. We're up to current code. It was built recently, so while there is damage, there's some spalling, there's some curb damage. We already have our engineers out there. This is an image of them doing testing to test the integrity of the slab. We have a forensics company that's already out there that is doing core testing. But the early results show us that we're in a good position to reuse this slab. And but I think that's going to be not the norm at all. Okay, design process. So let's jump into how do we make a house? There's the startup phase. In most cases, the owner, you are typically going to need to provide us a title report, topographical survey that's by a licensed land surveyor, a soils report by a licensed geotechnical engineer or geologist. Sometimes you can get away without this, or you can delay that. It depends on the project. Floor plans, as-built, or photos of the existing house, if your desire is to recreate it exactly. This is sort of the bare minimum we need to get going on design. Now, your architect can provide, most architects can provide you references, or a site surveyor and a soils geotechnical engineer. We've worked with a lot of them, so you should ask your architect for their suggestions on that. And I come back to this slide at this point because it talks about the dreams and thinking about your attitude towards life. And I think this is the point where you got to start evaluating these things. This is my house. This is this window that I wake up in front of every morning. I love my house. It brings me joy. I look out of this window, I see nature. I have fantastic memories here. It's only 1,500 square feet, but it does everything I need it to do. And so it's tailored to my way of living. And I show this because I really encourage people to think about architecture being a frame for your ideal life. Architecture sits in the background of our lives, but it is the frame for your most important life memories. And I know it might be hard at this point, but I think it is really vital that you dream a little at this point. If you've lost your house, I think it might be tempting to just recreate the old thing, recreate the old house, bring it back to life, get back to where it was. And I get that. I think it's important, before you seriously commit to that, just take a beat and really imagine how a new house could help you live better. This has been such a devastating experience for so many people, but I believe you can choose to view this as an opportunity to create the life that you want to live. And I get that none of you wanted this opportunity. Most people, when they come to us because they have a dream and they want to make that dream come true. And it's optimistic and they're happy and they're excited. I get that now people who come to architects now never even thought they'd ever need one. And but here it is. This opportunity is here for you now. And I would say what I love most about this job is that creating architecture is fundamentally optimistic. It is a way of bringing positivity into the world and help us do better. So with that, I would say you got to question things. And a good architect will be curious about your imagined way of living. They'll want to get inside your head and prompt you to dig deeper into your real qualitative and quantitative needs for the home. And they should be asking you big, essential questions that go beyond just where to put the kitchen or the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. Those are easy things. Those are easy to solve. But there are bigger questions. Questions such as, what about your previous house brought you joy and what did not? What kind of light do you like to wake up to in the morning? What are the moods and atmospheres and memories that this new house might evoke? What fundamentally matters to you in life? And how fixed is your notion of the house that you've already envisioned leading up to design? So you've already come to the meeting and to the table with some ideas. The question is how fixed you are in those ideas, because that's a part of the process. The thing I would say is, we find that successful projects and the best clients provide clarity and depth on the qualities they are seeking, while giving their architect the flexibility to explore exactly how to achieve them. So we provide a detailed questionnaire for our clients at the beginning which is several pages long and has, 40, 50, 60 questions on it about how you want to live and how you did live. And I think that's really enlightening to a lot of our people, and I think it yields better results because we can get into your head. So that kind of helps our clients think of the activities they want to accomplish and the qualities they want to feel, and they look to us to figure out what kinds of spaces can achieve those things. So then you jump into design, and it's a collaborative process, and it's a fun process, and it's the best part. It's the most fun. We're sketching, we're making models, physical models, computer models, we're doing diagrams. We're really exploring the options. We look at all kinds of different configurations and different ways to solve the problem. And the questions that we ask are really opportunities for us to find the what we like to say, the most for the least. How do we get the most design innovation and the best kind of answer of design while doing the fewest moves, using the fewest resources? After design, we'll arrive at a place where your architect and you are comfortable with the design. At that point, you jump into construction documents and engineering. The architect begins the coordination process with structural engineers, civil engineers, all of those consultants. We begin putting the project into CAD. We document it. We hardline it, is what we call it. We figure out more definitively the materials in the projects, the finishes in the projects. We are marking up drawings with our engineers, collaborating with them. And at the end of it, you end up with this complete set of drawings that are fully detailed and are an instruction set for how to build the house. We submit that then to plan check. So let's talk about permitting and fire rebuilds. Building codes. Building codes and permitting, I would say, are my least favorite part of this job, but it is a necessary part of it, and it is a difficult, challenging part, but we are used to getting through it. These are the California building codes that we are used to. We have to have knowledge of all of these: mechanical code, residential code, electrical code, energy code, green code, fire code. Each of these, if you printed them out, is probably 2 to 5 inches thick of paper if it was in a binder. And we are supposed to adhere to all of that when we are submitting for plan check. So it is a big undertaking to make projects compliant with the codes. This is a flow chart of the plan check process that we put together for a project we were doing in Brentwood during the pandemic. We were going through the plan check process and thought, let's diagram it out and to sort of show what it takes. So each one of these pieces is a point where we are either providing drawings or getting drawings back with comments. And I know the font is small, but you can see we had our first submittal in February. And then each one of these steps, it splits up and it goes to all these different divisions within the LA Department of Building and Safety. So there's a grading division, the Bureau of Engineering, Sanitation, Fire Department, Planning Department. All of these different departments want to see your drawings and want to give comments on the drawings. So we are managing step by step this whole process, and it takes a long time. I don't think anyone is surprised by that. We, at this point, again, this was in the pandemic, for a pretty standard, straightforward kind of house. And we started in February 15th, and you can see by the time we made this chart, we were down at the second submittal and grading. That was August at that point. So 6 months that it took us to get to this point. And then at the end, in this red dot down at the corner, that's when we finally are what's called RTI, ready to issue. That means you've got your building permit and you're ready to build, begin building. So, so this is a stressful, difficult, complicated process to go through all this. And and I know that the city will talk about streamlining of this, and see what the city is saying about what they'll do to make this easier. Let me advance slides here. Okay, so you probably have heard about like-for-like rebuilds from LA City, and the governor and LA County is going to be similar for this. There are size limits to this idea of like-for-like. So these are projects where the houses and accessory buildings are up to 110% of their prior approved square footage, height, and bulk. And these projects will receive, quote, expedited review with some conditions. Let's talk about what expedited review means. It's not totally clear at this point from the city, but what we understand is the city response time from plan check submission is stated to be 30 days. However, this is only for their first review and does not include time to respond to corrections and clearances. So plan check is an iterative experience. Sometimes we go through 3 rounds, 4 rounds of plan check because they have comments after comments after comments. So this 30 days is just for their first review. So if we back up to this chart, this is these sort of white diamonds. Those are the first reviews. So you can see that there still are steps involved after those reviews, and time involved after those first reviews. So I would recommend we really take it with a grain of salt. When you hear 30 days, I really think that it's perhaps 3 to 5 months is what I would say that it really is going to take for these like-for-like rebuilds. Waived entitlements. So like-for-like rebuilds do not need to gain applicable CEQA, discretionary, or coastal approvals. HOA rules still apply. So if you're in an HOA district with CC&Rs, you're going to have to adhere to those. But if you're in a coastal zone, you don't have to go through coastal commission, which is very, very good because that can be a year to 24 months sometimes to get through coastal commission. So this is great news for people who are near the coast or subject to CEQA. ADUs, they can be built prior to the main house. This is a change. It used to be that you had to build them simultaneously or after the main house is built. Now you can build them before. Detached ADUs do not add to the 100% 10 threshold. So that's good too. It's not going to affect your square footage that you're allowed. And in certain cases, cover parking can be waived too. So there are scenarios where you can turn a garage into an ADU and then you don't have to build a garage because it's basically becomes your ADU. That's a whole other discussion of how to navigate that. Then there's temporary housing. Mobile homes, RVs, tiny houses are permitted on the lot during construction for 3 years. And then your plans. If your previous home was built in the last 5 years, the city will accept a submittal of the previous set of plans. You just need to contact your architect or your builder and see if they have copies of that. You could resubmit those and expedite your approval process and in theory get the exact same house. Then there's the second bucket, and this is houses that are over 110% rebuilds. This is again for LA City, and the county, I think, is going to be similar for this. These projects, are greater than 110%. So if you say, you know, I always wanted my house to be bigger. It was only 1,000 square feet. I want 2,000 square feet. Okay, well, then you're going to have to go through this 110% process, which requires full regular plan check and requires you to adhere to current zoning rules. So you don't get anything for free with this scenario. The entitlements will trigger coastal review and specific plan and any other typical entitlements. Again, if you're in this threshold of wanting more square footage than you had with your house previously. And then the review timeline is still not clear. We're following what the city and county are saying. Our understanding is that these projects in this bucket are still to receive some kind of priority review, but the approvals will most certainly take longer than a like-for-like project. Our speculations are perhaps 5 months at best to over a year. Again, with that house in Brentwood that I mentioned, it ultimately took us about 10 months during the pandemic to get that thing through plan check. So the more complex the project conditions, the zoning, the entitlements, the longer it's going to take. There are people who are going to disagree with me about this. People are going to tell you, we can do it in 3 months or 2 months. I have my doubts, and I'd love to be proven wrong on this. So let's give a visual example of what like for like means. So here's a very simple scenario. The blue is your original house footprint and your original garage footprint. You've got the street over here on the side and then your driveway. On that, we overlay a new design for a new house. And here are some of those conditions. This again is for like for like. So the new house footprint must be in approximately the same location on site, but it can vary slightly. So if the profile is not exactly what you had before, I think they're going to be okay with that. However, you cannot change the use of the building. So if, for example, you said, I didn't like my garage in the back here, I want to push it to the front, they're not going to allow that because it's not in approximately the same location on the site. So you're stuck a little bit with the general location where you had things. However, you need not match the original room layouts. So you want the kitchen in the back now and it used to be in the front, that's no problem. You can get that done. They're not going to object. You also need not match the original architectural style, subject to your HOA and CC&Rs if you're under the influence or in a zone that has those. But if you're not, and say you had a Spanish house and now you really want a modern house, you can do that and still be fine with this like for like location rules. And these same rules apply for accessory structures like the garage too. Next, we are adding in this 10%. So this dark blue areas, these are these new 10% increased added areas for this structure. So you can see pushing out a little bit in some places, but that should be acceptable in this scenario. Lastly, then we're overlaying on our setbacks. So of course, you've got your property line on the outside, but then you have building setbacks. And they've changed over the years, over the decades, the setbacks have moved around. So if your house was built in 1960, I'm not positive, I would not count on them being identical in 2025. It's very unlikely. So this rule says that this sort of red line is let's say our 2025 current zoning setbacks. The new house can maintain the previous house setbacks, even in areas which do not conform to current zoning setbacks. So here in the front yard, you can see the house is over the setback because the existing previous house was over the setback. That will be allowed. However, these non-conforming areas must have records of approved permits when construction. So illegal unpermitted construction is not eligible. So if you tacked on an illegal back addition to your house or somebody did before you bought it, that's going to be a challenge to try to maintain it if it's under illegal setbacks. Again, the same goes for your accessory structures and your garage too. Then you have a zoning envelope. This gets very complicated, but every site has a unique set of zoning conditions and a unique zoning envelope. These are images just taken from the building code and our diagrams, which show that there are things like plane breaks in the profile of the walls that the zoning code will make us adhere to. There are things, of course, like height limitations and an envelope that your building has to sit within. So these are all the things that we are studying when we're making your design to make sure that we're compliant.
Ed,
Okay,
hello.
yes,
Hi, Ed. So before we move ahead, there's a couple of questions in the chat that I think it'd be good
okay,
to answer now.
Certainly.
So Kevin asks, does like for like also include a new basement you want to build under the same footprint of the original house?
That's a very good question. I actually did have that prior in the bullet points. The unsatisfactory answer is we don't know at this point. It's unclear. Um, I would say maybe, but I wouldn't count on it because the building code has very nuanced on how it counts square footage for basements. So it depends on things like the slope of your site. I think we're going to get more clarity on that in the coming weeks, but right now it's unclear.
Thank you. Another question is, can you give some insight into the plan check process? In particular, why it usually involves so much back and forth? Why are the issues that arise during the check not predictable in advance?
Um, I'm going to be careful I don't get myself in trouble here, but uh, it is a huge bureaucracy. You can imagine with the second largest city in the country, there are many, many interests and many, many departments and divisions. They are siloed off from each other generally. They each have their own thing that they're pursuing. Grading division, the something called low impact development, which is about stormwater. Each of them has their specialty, and they are focused only on that, getting you compliant with that specialty. So we have to please all of them. We have to get their approval on all of them. And there is no set timeline for them to respond. You get your comments when you get your comments back. And um, communication, I would say, with these jurisdictions, I'm going to say it, has been very poor since the pandemic. Um, there were a lot of retirements in the department, I think. There's a lot of people who are new to the department who are not as well versed on how they do things and how they've done things in the past. And so there's a learning curve going on, I think, for people. And a disaster like this is only going to make that even more difficult. So it's an excellent question. Why don't we get all of our answers in one plan check and get them all answered? It's like doing your math homework, right? They circle the things that they see are wrong, and they give you a correction sheet back. And we do our best to correct all of those things. But the building code is a little like the Bible in a way. People can have different interpretations of it, and people can kind of read it certain ways. And sometimes it's not right, but sometimes you get one response from one plan checker, and then 6 months later, another plan checker is looking at it and they give you a different response and a different interpretation. I wish it was straightforward, checking the boxes, but projects are complex. Projects are all nuanced, all different, and people can see things differently. And that's why we are experienced in it. We try to forecast where things will go. We have experience with, if we try to do this, we're going to meet resistance. So we should comply with it in this way. It's a bit of a chess game, and that's why it takes so long.
Thank you so much, Ed. There are two more questions and they kind of go together here. So I'll ask first Morgan's question. How many clients can a single architect handle at once, and the same for a general contractor? And is it better to wait a year or two to start in order to avoid price surging?
Okay, I'll take the first question first. I would say bigger isn't always better. I would say, I've worked at all different sizes of firms prior to opening mine. And an architect can handle, a licensed architect with their team Sometimes they can handle 4 projects, sometimes they can handle 10 projects. It depends on the complexity of them, and the support staff. It also depends on frankly, how good they are. Some don't care and they churn it out, and it's a volume business, and they are just moving from one to the next, and they don't quite have as sort of soft gloves touch and care with their projects and their clients. So they might go very fast and can handle, a whole bunch at once. Others are very careful, very deliberate. They see it as a craft, and they take on fewer projects. So it's a good question to ask when you're asking your architects. But there's going to be a lot of demand. And just to answer the second question about when to begin, it's a difficult question. I mean, I want to say if you're ready, you should begin, because in my experience, doing this 25 years, I've never seen construction prices go down. I've seen them go flat. So I've seen construction prices plateau, during in 2012, 2008, 20 to 2012, when we had a recession. Construction prices generally kind of flattened out for a couple of years, but they did not go down. And then, of course, when there's more demand, they go up. So maybe in this case, we will see a peak and then a normalization. I can't predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball, but if it was me, I would begin the process, because it can be kind of a race, and there's going to be a demand, and you could find yourself thinking, looking back at my slide that I just showed with cost per square foot, looking back at it a year from now, and maybe now it's 1,100 or 1,200 or something. I just don't know. So I know that's not the answer people want to hear, but that's the advice I'd give.
Thank you so much, Ed. And one final question here from Wesley. He asks, does it make sense for you to begin the process with a contractor? We met a contractor during the estimation process for insurance. Now he's asking us for a retainer to start working with us on a rebuild, during which he would introduce us to architects and prefab options. It almost seems like a backwards design bid build.
Yeah, so this is a good question. It can be fine. It can be fine to go that way. I think especially if you are committed to design build versus design bid build. So if you like that model and like the speed that it offers, and you accept the cons of that model, then you can go this route. I would say, of course, contractors want you to sign on the dotted line now, because it locks you in. It locks you into them and their process, and it prevents you from seeking bids from other contractors. So it sort of shortcuts the competitive bidding process, and they have you as their client now, and you start the journey with them. And yeah, there are some builders that I've worked with that have given me referrals. They say, hey, we already know this owner and they like us, and can you look at them, talk to them, and consider being their architect? And we're open to those conversations. So I think the answer is, I think a lot of people feel like they got to have their contractor now, that we gotta find our contractor right now and get going. And I would say, maybe if you want to go design build, I'm sorry, then sure, maybe. But if you're committed to a design bid build process, then you could just start with an architect, and they'll begin the design process, and then we'll find contractors. We'll help you source them. We will, look at the contractors who are working in your neighborhood. We have contractors we've worked with that we can provide referrals to for you to look at. And I would say, I get to this in a later slide, but there is a point in sort of the middle to late design stages where we do recommend that we have a contractor begin looking at our design, because they can do pre-construction services and they can provide early input on our design and say, and we can course correct based on their feedback without having to just, sign away our project to them. So so there's different models, and it's kind of, a case by case basis for how people want to proceed and how comfortable they are. Some people feel like I like this guy and I want to lock him down because he says that he's got a list of 100 people that are on the waiting list. So I get that there is pressure there. You've got to decide what you're comfortable with.
Thank you so much, Ed. I know you have so much more to share with us, so why don't we go ahead and I'll continue to monitor the chat for any other questions.
Thanks. All right, we're about 2/3 of the way through, so sorry if this is going long, but there's a lot of further content, and we're just talking about construction, so let's get into it. Finding a general contractor. The qualifications. Ideally, candidates have built in your region on houses of similar scope. Your architect may suggest GCs, general contractors, that they've worked with already. Google Street View can display historical images of your neighborhood, where you might look for contractor signs at sites that were constructed pre-fire. So this is actually a clever way for you to see who is building in your neighborhood before the fire. You can go back and look, there's a little tab in Google Street View that lets you go back to 2021 and 2019 and 2017. And if you know of some properties that were under construction in the area, you can take a look at them on Street View, and maybe there's a construction sign there with contact info that you can look up. And we found that's a pretty good way to find some expertise in the area. And of course, then there are other things like word of mouth and Yelp, and there are other ways that you can find a contractor. You want to check their license and references. So there are links in the resources slide where you can check a contractor's license. I would insist that you do this. I would also say you ask to contact prior clients, get their references with their addresses of the completed projects that they had worked on. Timing. So just sort of touched on this, but I'll say it again. Some GCs are willing to begin the conversation late in the design stage, and they'll offer what they call pre-construction services. Ideally, this is just sort of a flat fee that you pay them. You pay them $5,000, something like that, and they'll pull together a budget that, looking at the design where it's at, and can give you a rough order of magnitude of where you are with the design. And this provides clarity and allows for course corrections in the design. If all of a sudden we're way over, then okay, we can look at how do we chop out 200, 300 square feet out of the design. How do we figure out other creative ways that we can reduce square footage and scope? However, signing up with a GC at an early stage may limit your ability to competitively bid the project later. This is just what we talked about. So you want to know if you're getting locked in or if you have an escape hatch if you change your mind later. Bidding, ideally you get 3 bids, and often these bids, we solicit for bids during plan check. So during that whole process of being in the city is when we can start narrowing down our contractor selections and seeing if they're really serious about the project and talking to us, and seeing what their bids are. Finally, you want to contract with them. It's required by law, and it should include a timeline and a budget. And there's a number of other things it should include. Your architect and or your attorney can assist in reviewing that contract. Never ever provide large sums of money up front. Never. They should be billing you as project progresses. So as things get completed, they will bill you for the scope of work that has been completed. But they should never ask you for 50% up front. I would walk away from anything like that. And request copies of their insurance. they need to have workers' comp insurance, they need to have project insurance. So you want to make sure that they're in good standing with those things. I show this image again, actual photo versus rendering. Contractors can do this too. They can create sites that full of great images of projects. Maybe those projects aren't even theirs. Maybe they are from another project, another contractor. You don't know. So ask for references and locations of other prior built projects and try to see them in person if you can. Okay, the construction process. I'm going to breeze through this, but it is, again, a process where we are on board. We are involved from start to finish as an architect. So we're doing things like we're reviewing submittals. We are looking at material finishes. We are verifying that the construction drawings that we drew and that you paid for are what is actually getting built. And if they're not, then we have a conversation and we say, wait a second, this window flashing, it's not being done quite exactly the way that we drew it up and what we're used to. And let's have a conversation about that. And we can then discuss it and see maybe I'm wrong, maybe they're wrong. We can come to an agreement on how to proceed. That is good. And that kind of, let's say, disagreement at some point is good so that we all are checking each other and we're all making sure that we're getting the best product for you. I've had good experiences with almost every contractor I've worked with through a very thorough vetting process. I would work with almost all of them again. I think they would say that about me. So when it works, it's a collaborative process where we're supporting each other and we're all working together on the same team to get that thing done, get that project done. But I know we've all heard these horror stories and you watch HGTV. By the way, I would say, don't watch HGTV. It is a fantasy. It is a fallacy. It is completely scripted. It has no reality in connection to the real building industry. It's entertainment, but I say this to clients a lot, like, just put that out of your head that is how things go, because it's not it's not the way I've seen construction actually going, where you're working with real professionals. You can't, build a house in a weekend the way they do on those shows. So unsubscribe from HGTV, please. Okay, so we've gone through construction. We get to the finish line. Typically, construction can take 10 months, for a new ground up house. 10 months is a great timeline if you can do it. We were close to doing that on our Palisades house. I think we're going to hit about 15 months, I think, is what we're going to get. But it can go up to 18 months, 24 months, and beyond, depending on how difficult things are. But eventually you get to completion, you have a beautiful new house, and you can throw a party and you can have Thanksgiving dinner. And this is something I would tell people you got to keep your eye on the prize, and you got to really try to envision these moments when it's all over and it's all done and you moved in. You can forget about the process and what it took. You can enjoy the moments of your life. You can imagine having your family for Thanksgiving dinner or the holidays and just enjoy it. And we're here to help you get there. That's really our ultimate goal, is to bring you joy in this new dwelling. So again, we are optimists. We think things can be better. And that's why I enjoy doing this. So last segment, fire hardening and resilience. These are just some quick tips on how to prevent this from happening again. So these are best practices from a number of pros on ways that you can set yourself up for success, God forbid, when the next fire comes. First is defensible space. And that means that you regularly clear the perimeter brush within 100 feet of your house and use primarily native plant landscaping on site for wildfire resistance and habitat resilience. So I'm sure you've heard this. It's very important that you have a perimeter where the fire cannot advance on your house. You want to space out trees and create islands of vegetation that are amidst site walls, rocks, gravel, hardscape zones. Uh, so you're sort of strategically placing vegetation so that it's not threatening the house. Your defense zone might overlap with adjacent properties, so it's recommended you coordinate with your neighbors to create a community-wide fire defense plan. So work with your neighbors to figure these things out so that everybody is protected. Then we talk about the space that's within 0 to 5 feet around your home. That has the greatest impact on reducing the risk of wildfire damage. So the best practice is no vegetation recommended within 5 feet of any structure. This means no mulch, no wood chips. Use clear soil, rocks, gravel, or concrete. And this is a tough one because we always want to try to soften the building by putting plants next to it and soften that place where the building hits the ground. There are creative, innovative ways to do this where it's not unsightly and it looks good, but it's very important because plants that are burning on the perimeter of the house, they will easily jump to the house. Fences and decks. You want to avoid attaching fences, walls, and decks constructed of combustible materials that directly attach to the building. A minimum 5-foot separation is recommended. So again, you don't want combustible materials touching the house. Instead, you want ignition-resistant materials for fences, walls, and decks, like concrete, poured concrete, concrete block, stone, metal. Some hardwoods like ipe and sumaru or kumaru are very fire resistant. Exterior rated fire retardant treated wood that's been treated to resist fire is effective too. But you don't want that fire going along that fence and contacting your house and jumping to your house. Note that most plastic and wood plastic composite materials, decking materials like PVC and Trex, are combustible. They do sometimes make products that aren't, but you got to do your research on that. And then, of course, you want to avoid growing vegetation on fences and walls. If you build a nice big concrete block wall to protect you and then you grow a vine on it, well, that vine can just catch on fire and jump to your house. So avoid that. The roof. The roof is the most fire vulnerable component of the home. In most WUI locations, we say WUI locations, which is WUI, that's the wildland urban interface. That's basically the technical term for fire-prone locations. A Class A roof will already be required by California code, and that is the highest fire rating available. So the building code already says you got to put the highest fire rated roof on your project. Common Class A materials are asphalt composition singles, clay and concrete tiles, single ply or built up roofing if you have a low slope roof, and some metal roofing. You can also add a layer of exterior gypboard sheeting under the roof membrane. This is called Den's Deck. There are other products. It's basically exterior gypboard that increases your fire resistance underneath the roof materials. And then as a good practice, you should be removing leaf debris, clearing gutters, or get a gutter cover so leaves can't get in there, and regularly trim your vegetation so that it's not encroaching too close to the house. Next are overhangs. This is a big one we heard about, and I think this probably caused a lot of houses to burn down, especially older houses. Embers and fire heat can be trapped under overhangs like eaves and in the upper portion of exterior walls. These overhangs can ignite if they're not constructed of fire-resistant or non-combustible materials. So we recommend, if you can, eliminate overhangs altogether if possible. In our designs, a lot of our designs, we have no overhangs, just because it's sort of the architectural style that we're pursuing. But if you're pursuing a house that does, look better or need overhangs, we recommend you enclose those overhangs with soffits and fascias that have a minimum 1 hour fire resistance rating, which surprisingly stucco can do. Cement board, fire treated lumber. So this diagram here with this blue piece, this is just kind of a horizontal element that is protecting the roof structure from catching on fire. So here's some photos of that. On the left, we have bad examples where you can see the wood is just totally exposed to fire that's coming up. On the right, we have good examples where we've stuccoed in that eave, or we've used something like cement board to protect that eave from catching on fire. Vents and attic. Roof vents provide air circulation into an attic, but are highly vulnerable to flame entry and ember attacks. So we recommend eliminating roof vents if you can, and or the entire attic altogether. I think we need to get away from the idea of this kind of room above the house that's full of air that fire can enter into. So what we say instead, consider doing an unvented roof assembly with cathedral ceilings. That is, ceilings that are open to the roof, basically the underside of the roof structure. It's protected by drywall, but you have more of a vaulted kind of condition. And to do this, you got to pay some careful attention, though, to insulation, roof assembly details, and your HVAC system to prevent vapor condensation issues. So sometimes you have to do things like spray foam on the underside of the studs, or sorry, the rafters, so that air is not circulating in there at all, so that you do not get condensation issues. If, on the other hand, you are going to use vents and have an attic, ensure they have ember resistant and non-combustible screens or shutters. Okay, we're getting close to the end. So next are exterior walls. And these are, we have some recommended materials here. Traditional 3-cut stucco actually is not bad at being fire resistant. Of course, in the disasters we saw, fire was raging for 10 hours, 20 hours, who knows? It's not going to be able to stand up to that. But if the fire is raging for an hour, it should be able to hold up to that if done properly. Fiber cement board and panels, I think we're going to see a lot of that on new projects. Concrete, poured or block, stone, and steel. These are materials that are resistant to fire. Not recommended is vinyl siding, metal siding that is susceptible to warping, or untreated wood siding. Now, you can add an exterior layer of gypboard sheeting like Den's glass, which is similar to Den's deck on the roof, under the wood and wall finishes to increase the fire resistance. Adding to this to all your exterior wall surfaces is like an extra barrier that can protect you during a fire. So back to this slide of our project, we were just in the process of adding Den's glass to the exterior of our house. This provides extra fire protection. Unfortunately, we were still had bare plywood, and so the house was not able to survive with this. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little sidebar here. This is a question I heard a lot of right after the fire, so I want to address it. And it is, hey, architect, it's 2025. Why are we still building houses out of wood studs and plywood anyway? Why not instead build houses like they do and you can insert your other world region like Europe or Asia or wherever, Florida, pick your region. Why don't we make them like they do there? Make the walls out of poured concrete, or ICF is a formwork where you pour concrete into it. Why don't we make them out of concrete blocks or stone, metal, steel frame? Rammed earth is another technology, and adobe is another technology. Earth, basically, that doesn't burn. So why don't we make houses out of these materials? And the answer is you can. However, there's some caveats, and there are some kind of, I would say, unsatisfying but arguably true reasons to consider if you want to build in a more unconventional way. That is, first, there are industry norms. All of these alternative wall materials are just slightly to way beyond the LA status quo construction orthodoxy for single family dwellings. So there are fewer residential contractors and laborers who are experienced with working with them or even willing to try. The other thing is costs. Builders that do have the experience will generally pass that cost on to you, the owner, due to the rarity of their expertise, the perceived increased risk or difficulty of building in those materials, and in most, but not all cases, the increased expense of those materials. Compared to those other materials, wood is generally going to be cheaper. Wood studs and wood framing is generally going to be cheaper. And this may change if the market demands it in this disaster, but that's kind of up to you. And the question is, you know, are you willing to pay double, triple the cost for what all your neighbors are paying to get a concrete house? It's a difficult question. And of course, if everybody does it, then sure, costs will come down. But the reality is that it's just not as common. And here's some other things to consider. Sustainability. Wood is a renewable resource with a lower carbon footprint than most alternatives. And that is, of course, assuming that it avoids fire and being burned down during its lifespan. Seismic issues. Wood has a good resiliency in an earthquake. Other materials, less so. So, you know, Japan is a culture that is basically a stick frame wood culture like Los Angeles. And that's because wood studs are good at flexing in a seismic events. They can move around and survive. Things like concrete have a more difficult time, I would say, doing that. So it's just not as common. And last is the codes. The California codes do permit the wood frame walls with exterior finish surfaces like we just discussed to help improve the fire resistance. They also require fire sprinklers on the interior of the house. So, so the reality is until wood frame construction is forbidden by code, it will be built and we will see it. So that's why we are used to using it. Okay, a couple more slides and we'll be done. Fire hardening for doors, windows, and skylights. Recommended glazing for these are double or triple layered tempered glass with a metal frame or a metal clad wood frame. So you want to avoid vinyl windows or plastic windows. Those are going to melt away. The window falls out and then all of a sudden fire can get into the house. So again, we recommend metal or a metal clad wood frame. Exterior fire rated doors can be up to an hour and a half. So you can get a door that is rated to sit there for an hour and a half in front of a fire before it actually gives way. And they're not that out of range in terms of expense. You can also do metal fire shutters that provide extra protection for windows and glass doors that can roll down or be retracted when a fire approaches. This is not too common in LA. Maybe it'll become more common, but those can be effective at shielding you from fire. Active defense systems. So as I said, interior fire sprinklers are required by California code for all new dwellings. These are well worth it. The statistics are staggering at how much better fire sprinklers can defend a house, at least when it's an interior fire. Wildfire is a different story, but for interior fires, they do the job. Exterior roof-mounted sprinklers are a novel, but some say unproven fire defense system which coat your site with water or fireproof gel when the fire approaches. These are best, they work best if they are on a standalone source with pressurized delivery and or a backup generator for needed pumps. So the power goes down, you need the system to still function. So solar panels with a battery backup generator, that can provide perhaps the power enough to get the pumps working so that when everything goes down, your system is still functioning. Or you pressurize it is another way, but you got to make sure that it works when the disaster hits. A swimming pool or a cistern can be interlinked to pumps and hoses for on-site firefighting. This is pretty straightforward to do. You can have a hookup at your pool pump that connects to a hose where, of course, we don't recommend people stay behind to fight fires themselves, but it is a possibility with a system like that. Lastly, you can coordinate with your neighbors to see if such systems can be installed on a community scale. And this is actually, there's discussion of this happening at our project in Chautauqua, that all the neighbors are talking about doing these roof-mounted sprinklers to kind of provide a blanket protection for their whole neighborhood. And if they can get everyone to comply, it could potentially be very effective. These are some images of how those systems work. So basically they sweep in a radius all around the site, and they blanket it with water or some kind of a gel. There are these sort of little sprinklers and systems that are mounted onto the roof. Very, very interesting. The code doesn't really say much about these systems at this point. We'll see how things evolve. Lastly, I would say with all that preparation, there's also just dumb luck. And on the left is this image of this house that survived the fire. This is on Iliff Street in the Palisades in the Alphabet Streets. It's about 2 blocks away from our site. It survived. It has a lot of these best practices that we just talked about. You could see it. And this house kind of went viral about, how it, was so well designed. And that's true. But it also was lucky, because this house on the right is one that is next door to our site. And it was built last year. It was about a year old. It was completely clad in stone. It had a metal roof. It had these concrete block walls to act as a fire break. And as you can see, it burned to the ground. So even putting in all these systems in place, you're giving yourself a better chance, but it's no guarantee at all. So with that, I'm providing here a list of resources that I've mentioned. You can link to those, all kinds of good stuff in there that can help you on your way as you start this journey. Last, I would just say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I sincerely wish everyone the best in getting back on their feet. I know that my community, the architect community of LA, is mobilized and here to help. We're coordinating with each other in our organizations to help people and share information. I'm happy to talk to anybody about their situation and give an assessment. I sincerely hope everybody can weather this storm, and I hope this has been helpful. So I'm
Ed,
happy to take questions.
Ed, thank you. Thank you so much. This really is a master class in the process from all the way to the beginning, all the way to what we have to think about. And I believe it has brought not only a wealth of information for all of our attendees, but anyone else who's going to watch this recording. I'm just so thankful that you took the time to put that entire slide deck together, create all those resources that we will then share out. So folks, there are a couple of more questions here that, Ed has so graciously said that he will answer. I do want to share a couple of different things. We at the Harvard Club of Southern California, we've come together. We strongly believe in keeping our community, all of our community, regardless whether you're an alum or not, well-informed and well-connected. So I'll share my screen here to show you our website and also to show you where you can find additional information. So on our website here, if you just Google Harvard Club of Southern California, right on the drop-down menu, you're going to find wildfire assistance. There, you're going to find a hub, a link to a hub. And so this is a document that the Wildfire Assistance Committee have put together. This is being spearheaded by Glenn Nano and Paul Bakota. And you're going to find here not only links with the recordings, this will also be on our website, of the different virtual info sessions and webinars, but also a whole set of other information and resources that we put together. So you see here all the different webinars that we've hosted, and under each link, you are going to find the recording to that webinar. And so we will continue to update this and put this in front of our alumni. Please do share with anyone who needs this information because it is so important. So I'm going to move now towards some of the questions. But before, if some of you have to go, tomorrow I'll be sending out an email with the slide deck that Ed has put together alongside with the link to our website so you can access that hub and the previous recordings. And please be on the lookout because we do have more events planned ahead. So so there's a lot of questions here. So
Sure, I expected that.
yeah, you can also see some in the chat. So let me see. So one question that came up, the cost per square footage, that bell curve that you shared with us, does that include the cost of land?
No, it does not.
Okay,
So
great.
the assumption is that you already have your land.
Perfect.
It's the hard cost to build the dwelling itself and any things like driveways, swimming pools are going to up that dollar per square foot figure, or other kind of amenities like that. But it's the house itself, and again, it's not the soft cost included. It's just that dollar per square foot hard cost.
Thank you. Another question is, our home in the Palisades was extensively damaged, but is still standing. Will we also be eligible to add the 10% to our rebuild plans?
Boy, it all depends. Boy, that is a tough question. I think it is an eligible project if it has damage, depending on how extensive that damage. If we're talking smoke damage, but otherwise the house is standing, then I don't know. But if half of it is gone, I believe that is considered an eligible project and should be eligible to get that 10% benefit. Again, these are nuanced questions, and we're going to find out in the next weeks as people begin to pepper the building departments with these kind of more specific questions.
Another question is, do you think the city will allow zoning change on these lots?
Well, I need to know more information. Zoning change to what? I don't believe they're going to change it to commercial, if that's the question. I would say no, it's not likely. That's a big deal. If all of a sudden they change zoning, that requires movement at the governmental level to do that. It's not just something a zoning administrator can do. So it's a big deal, I would say. I think I need to know more about the nuances of the question to answer that better.
Thank you. This is in regards to the room mounted sprinklers. Are they hard to install and how expensive are they?
So I'll be clear, I've never installed them on a project of mine. However, a colleague right down the hall here, he talked to me for about 40 minutes about how it's done. I think it is not difficult to retrofit an existing house with those. In terms of cost, again, it depends on the scale of the house. What he quoted me was about, I think he said $90,000 to $120,000.
And here's, I think, one final question. And thank you again for everyone who's sticking around. How much do architects charge, and how is their compensation structured? How much of their charges are before construction begins, and how much after?
Good question. I wanted to squeeze this into the presentation, but it was already very long-winded. Typical architect fees are between 8 to 15% of your overall budget. So, it depends on a number of things. a complexity of your site, how difficult your project is. I mean, if you want to do things that are very, very challenging, that are going to be fighting the code, that's going to cost you more, frankly. Simple projects on simple flat sites that are more basic, those are going to be cheaper. But generally, 8 to 15% is the range that we see. As far as how we build that out, it's a lot like the contractor. It is incremental as the project goes along. So, if we're early in design, we're only going to charge you for the work we've done on that segment of design. There's usually a retainer of $1,000, $1,500 or so to begin the process. But after that, it's what we do, and I think what most architects do, is we bill you monthly, and it's just that segment of the work that we have done. And you will know what segment we're in because we're having meetings, we're having design meetings. You're evaluating what we've done. And we will inform you and say, hey, we're about 50% through the design process here. And so when you set up a contract with your architect, they're going to break down all the different phases and how much each of those phases are going to cost in total. Typically, the way it works is, at least for us, roughly about half of our fee is in design, and I would say 40% or so of our fee is in design. Another 40% or so is construction documents. And then the last 20% is permitting and construction administration, the on-site construction administration process. So that's generally how we dole it out. Because most of our work is done earlier in the process. Most of our work is design and documentation. And so that is all going to be done before the contractor starts swinging hammers.
Well, thank you so much, Ed, and thank you everyone for joining us. I wish you very well in what's coming ahead, and please, stay connected, stay together, and thank you again. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, all the best for everybody. I hope you get through it.